The coffee tasted like regret, burnt and bitter, a perfect metaphor for how Caleb Hartman felt about this place. The hash browns, limp and lifeless, sank into the plate like soggy memories, and the so-called world-famous pancakes? A cardboard catastrophe drenched in synthetic maple syrup. He stirred his third cup of misery, eyes fixed on the narrow window between the kitchen and the dining room. His dream was circling the drain, and all he could do was watch. Caleb had built an empire, 37 diners across 3 states, each one a tribute to classic Americana, the kind of places that evoked warm memories of family road trips and simpler times. Red vinyl booths, checkered floors, and the kind of hearty meals that made people sigh with comfort. Every single location had become profitable in under 18 months. Every single one, except this diner. This cursed, exhausting, soul-sucking corner of Maple and Main. "Cal, those dishes ain't gonna wash themselves." Tony's voice broke into his thoughts, sharp and grating. Caleb looked up from the abyss of his mental calculations. The name on his badge read Cal, a fake, as worn and faded as the yellow rubber gloves he pulled on. 3 weeks of scrubbing grime from plates and floors had calloused his hands in ways boardroom deals never had. The disguise was necessary. The truth was too heavy. "On it, boss," Caleb muttered, turning toward the mounting stack of dirty plates. Beyond the swinging doors, the lunch rush was blooming into chaos. The air filled with clinking silverware, conversations layered over country music, and the occasional bark from the grill. Construction workers hunched over burgers. Elderly couples shared slices of pie, hands brushing across the table like old promises. Office staff from the insurance company nearby clutched coffee cups like lifelines. These were good people. Honest, hard-working people. They deserved better than this. Then came the crash. A mug hit the floor, coffee splattering like dark confetti. "Excuse me, miss, I asked for my eggs over easy, not scrambled." The irritation in the man's voice sliced through the room. Caleb's eyes found the scene instantly. Jenna Collins stood at table 7, frozen, a trembling coffee pot still in her hands. She couldn't have been more than 22. Her sandy blonde hair was pulled into a messy ponytail that seemed to mirror the storm behind her eyes. The coffee puddle spread at her feet, shame soaking in faster than the liquid. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, barely audible. "I'll fix your order. I'll get a fresh cup right away." The customer, a middle-aged man with paint stains on his shirt, snapped back. "Third time this week. I've got 20 minutes for lunch, lady. 20. Tony was there in seconds, face flushed, voice rehearsed. "Mr. Peterson, I'll take care of it. Jenna, grab a mop." Jenna turned, flinching as her shoulder clipped another table. A salt shaker wobbled, saved only by the steady hand of an older woman who gently patted Jenna's arm in silent support. Caleb's jaw tightened. In just 3 weeks, he'd logged 17 separate incidents tied to Jenna. Wrong orders, spilled drinks, missed sides, and a particularly dangerous mishap involving a veggie burger and a customer with a meat allergy. But what gnawed at him more than her mistakes was the way everyone enabled her. Tony excused her. Big Eddie, the cook, covered for her. Other servers quietly picked up her slack. It was like watching a family tiptoe around a struggling sibling, all love and denial. And it was bleeding his business dry. The bell above the door jingled. More customers, more pressure. Caleb could feel it, the tension tightening like a drum. Orders were stacking up. Coffee refills were being missed. Jenna moved through the chaos like she was underwater, every step against the pull of some invisible tide. "Order up!" Big Eddie shouted from the grill, sliding 2 plates to the pass. "Table 4, chicken club and a BLT." Jenna approached. Her hands trembled as she reached for the plates. Caleb saw it then, that moment. She closed her eyes, took a breath. A silent prayer, maybe. Then she lifted the food. 4 steps. That's all she made it before gravity claimed its prize. The plates hit the floor in a muted symphony of ruin. Lettuce, tomatoes, and chicken scattered like confetti at a funeral. The diner fell into that quiet hush. Not silence, but something heavier, a collective unease, as if everyone were holding their breath at once. "Damn it, Jenna," Tony snapped. "That's coming out of your tips." Jenna dropped to her knees, scooping food with frantic efficiency. There was no pleading, no excuse, just the desperate movements of someone used to cleaning up their own mess. A piece of bacon clung to her shirt. Mayo streaked her cheek. Caleb watched, heart sinking. This was his moment. His instinct screamed for action, performance reviews, documentation, termination, all neat, all justified. But something else had taken root in him these past few weeks. Something deeper than numbers and quarterly reports. As he watched her knees press into the floor, her pride crumbling with each piece of food she tried to salvage, the usual metrics felt meaningless. He stood, untying his apron slowly. Tony was still scolding her, louder now. Around them, customers stared like they were witnessing a slow-motion car wreck. This couldn't go on. "This has to stop," Caleb whispered to himself. Tomorrow, he told himself, he'd fix it. Tomorrow, he'd lay down the law. Remind everyone what professionalism looked like, set the standard straight. Tomorrow, he would save his business. But for some reason, even as he said it, Caleb couldn't quite ignore the part of him that was already wondering if Jenna's mistakes were just symptoms. And if maybe, just maybe, the real problem had been hiding behind the dishwasher all along. As Caleb stormed toward the dining room, frustration pounding in his chest, he missed a small but deeply human detail. A photo, crumpled slightly at the edges, had slipped from Jenna's apron pocket when she dropped to her knees. It lay there, forgotten, amidst the wreckage of spilled sandwiches and shame. In the picture, a little girl with thick brown curls and eyes that mirrored Jenna's quiet sorrow smiled from a hospital bed. Tubes barely visible, a paper crown perched on her head like she was clinging to a childhood being stolen from her too soon. Big Eddie spotted it. His thick hands, usually busy flipping burgers, moved with uncharacteristic gentleness as he bent down, picked up the photograph, and slid it silently into his pocket. His eyes clouded, not just with concern, but recognition. There was more to Jenna's story than spilled coffee and ruined orders. He knew it, and now he carried that silent truth in his apron pocket. The next day offered no reprieve. If anything, it hit harder. The lunch crowd flooded in like a tide that wouldn't wait. Cars jammed the parking lot, booths overflowed, and the counter seats had a line trailing out the door. The clatter of plates, the hiss of the grill, the buzz of overlapping conversations. It was all a chaotic symphony, and Caleb stood just outside it, his cap pulled low, the role of dishwasher still masking the empire builder beneath. He'd spent the early morning trying to summon the right words, words that would be firm but fair, stern but not cruel. In the employee restroom, he'd practiced in front of the mirror like a man preparing for battle, balancing authority with compassion in every syllable. But compassion had a shelf life, and by late morning, watching Jenna flounder through yet another round of mix-ups and delays, his patience had all but dissolved. "Jenna! Table 12 is still waiting for their check," Sarah called as she swept by, balancing 3 plates on one arm like a circus act. Jenna barely nodded. She was pouring coffee into a glass, clearly meant for orange juice. The man at the table sighed heavily, lifting the empty juice glass and giving her a look that didn't need words. Sorry, Jenna mumbled, setting down the coffee pot with a clumsy thunk. "I'll get that juice right now." Her hands were trembling, her voice small, and Caleb could feel his fists tightening around the damp dish towel. Not once in 3 weeks had he seen her shine. And yet today she looked like a ghost trapped in a routine she couldn't escape. She moved like someone half awake, numb, dissociated, as though every action required more strength than she could afford. The kitchen bell rang. "Order up. Table 6, 2 burgers, medium, 1 no onions." Jenna approached slowly. Big Eddie handed off the plates, his eyes soft with concern. "You okay, honey? You look pale as a ghost." "I'm fine," she whispered, the lie brittle on her tongue. Her fingers gripped the plates too tightly, knuckles white as she made her way across the dining room. Her steps wavered, like the ground beneath her might give out at any moment. At table 6, a young couple waited. The woman fussed nervously with a resume folder, tapping it against her knee. The man checked his watch. "2 burgers, medium," Jenna announced, setting down the plates as if they weighed 1,000 pounds. The man inspected his food, eyebrows lifting. "Miss, I asked for no onions. I'm allergic." Jenna stared blankly at the plate, her breath catching. The onions glistened on top of the patty, an oversight she hadn't even registered. I can take it back," she stammered. "We've been waiting 25 minutes, the woman snapped, anxious fingers curling around her resume. "I have an interview at 2:30. Please, just fix it." Jenna reached to retrieve the plate, but her sleeve caught the edge of the water glass. Time slowed. The tumbler tilted. A tidal wave of ice water spilled across the table and into the woman's lap. Her white blouse turned translucent in seconds. Her resume, a lifeline, perhaps her only shot at something better, was soaked. The woman leapt up with a yelp. "Are you kidding me?" The man rose too, water dripping from his shoes. Around them, the restaurant fell silent, cutlery suspended, conversations halted. Even the sizzle from the grill dimmed like it too was shocked into silence. And that's when Caleb snapped. 3 weeks of watching this slow-motion collapse. 3 weeks of complaints, bad reviews, dwindling customer trust. 3 weeks of staff enabling a storm no one wanted to admit was getting worse. He tore off his gloves and walked out from behind the dish station, the quiet dishwasher no more. "Jenna!" His voice cut through the room like a blade. She turned, soaked in shame and cold water, face burning with humiliation. She hadn't expected him to speak, let alone take center stage. The dishwasher wasn't supposed to hold authority. "If you can't even do a basic job like serve a table," Caleb said, voice rising, "maybe you shouldn't be working here at all." The silence thickened. In the back, a fryer beeped into the void. A baby let out a soft cry. Tony appeared in the doorway, frozen in horror. Sarah dropped a tray mid-step. Even Big Eddie stopped mid-flip, a trail of burger grease dripping from his spatula. They all waited for the inevitable. They expected Jenna to crumble, to run out sobbing or scream in defiance. She was young, too young maybe, to carry herself through this without breaking. But she didn't. She stood still, utterly, hauntingly still. Her trembling stopped. Her breath steadied. When she finally looked at Caleb, her eyes weren't angry. They were ancient, wounded, hollowed out by grief most people couldn't begin to understand. And then she spoke. Her voice didn't rise. She didn't defend, didn't beg. It was barely more than a whisper. "I'm sorry. Yesterday was my daughter's funeral." A fork fell onto a plate with a sharp clink. In the kitchen, Big Eddie dropped his spatula. No one moved, no one blinked. The words hovered in the air, too heavy to land. Caleb felt his body go rigid, his mind scrambling to comprehend. Daughter? Funeral? Yesterday? Everything inside him collapsed. The words he'd rehearsed, the speech he'd clung to like a weapon, vanished. Guilt rushed in, cold and punishing. He'd been counting her mistakes, tallying her failures like numbers on a spreadsheet, never once stopping to ask why this young woman moved like the world had turned to ash beneath her feet. Around him, the diners sat frozen. The couple who moments ago had raised their voices now stood as still as statues, their frustration shriveling into shame. The woman's dripping papers were forgotten. The man swallowed hard, the word sorry stuck somewhere deep in his throat. And Caleb, once a titan of industry, now just a man, stood in the center of the storm he hadn't seen coming, realizing that sometimes the worst mistakes aren't the ones made with your hands, but the ones made with your heart closed. Jenna blinked, fast but dry-eyed. She wasn't crying. She was far beyond the threshold where tears could offer any comfort. Her face, pale and drawn, held the look of someone who had cried until there was nothing left, only the raw echo of grief burning in her bones. The air in the diner remained dense, waiting. Caleb opened his mouth, then closed it again. What could he possibly say? What sentence, no matter how well-meaning, could be enough? And how could he speak without blowing his carefully constructed cover, the anonymous dishwasher with rubber gloves and a clipboard hidden in the back of his mind? Silence expanded around him, stretched tight like the thinnest glass, threatening to shatter. Somewhere in the distance, a cell phone buzzed loudly on a forgotten table. The mundane sound felt obscene in the weight of the moment. And then Jenna moved. Not frantically, not with shame, but with a calm grace that cracked something in Caleb's chest. She smoothed her soaked uniform, picked up the glass she had knocked over, set it gently back on the table as though restoring order to a world that had forgotten kindness. "I'll clean this up," she said softly to the couple, her voice no longer trembling. "And I'll get you a new burger. No onions. Both meals are on the house." Then she turned and walked away, her steps slow and steady, like every footfall was a conscious act of defiance against the weight pressing down on her. She pushed through the swinging doors and disappeared into the back. Not a single person spoke. All eyes followed her, frozen. And only after she was gone did life return to the diner, cautiously. Conversations resumed, but in murmurs. Forks moved again, but the appetite had vanished. The young woman at table 6 stopped worrying about her soaked blouse. She simply stared at the door Jenna had walked through, her eyes wide with something more than sympathy. Remorse, maybe. Awareness. Caleb felt his body move before he made the decision. His feet carried him through the swinging doors, heart thudding. In the hallway, he nearly collided with Big Eddie. "You didn't know?" Eddie asked, voice low and strangely flat. Caleb could only shake his head. "Her little girl, Lily," Eddie began, working a dish towel in his calloused hands like it might spill answers if he wrung it hard enough. 6 years old. Some rare blood thing. Name's a mouthful. I can't say it right. Been sick a long time." The words hit Caleb like punches to the chest. 6 years old. He thought of his nieces, nephews. Imagine trying to explain death to a child who still believed in fairy tales and bedtime wishes. Eddie continued, his voice quieter now, more reverent. "Jenna drove her to specialists in 3 different states. Sold her car for the treatments. Been working here on double shifts and weekends down at Murphy's Grocery, just to keep the bills from swallowing her whole." Sarah appeared beside them. Her eyes were red, mascara smudged. She didn't try to hide the tears. Not like Jenna. Jenna had moved past crying, past coping. "The funeral was Monday," Sarah whispered, her voice breaking. "Little Lily passed last Thursday night." Caleb's breath caught in his throat. "She called Tony on Friday," Sarah continued. "Asked for the weekend off. Said she'd be back Tuesday." "She came back Saturday," Caleb said, stunned. "She couldn't afford not to," Sarah replied. "No health insurance here. Tony's been begging corporate for benefits for over a year. No sick leave, no bereavement pay." The word corporate lodged in Caleb's brain like a thorn. She meant him. The policies, the decisions, the numbers he'd signed off on from the comfort of his office. All that abstract data had a face now. A name. A little girl with big brown eyes in a hospital bed. A single mother who buried her child and came back to work because she had no other option. "Yesterday she told me work helps her breathe," Sarah added, her voice shaking. "Said if she stops moving, she might just stop altogether." The silence behind the break room door grew heavier. No sobbing, no screams. Just a vast stillness that screamed louder than grief ever could. Caleb pictured Jenna on the other side, sitting alone, dried out and hollow, trying to stitch herself together enough to carry on. The mistakes started getting worse after Lily got sick, Big Eddie said. She was in and out of hospitals, and Jenna, she was surviving on 3 hours of sleep, taking care of Lily all day, working all night. We all tried to help, Sarah whispered. But what could we say? Quit. Let your daughter suffer for rent money? No one wanted to tell her to stop, so we just tried to carry some of it. Caleb pressed his back against the wall, the weight of it all crushing down on him. Every note in his little black notebook, every critique and calculated plan for Jenna's firing, now felt like poison he'd brewed himself. He hadn't seen her. Not really. He'd seen numbers, metrics, loss. She's been through hell, Eddie said softly, and she never once asked for pity. 20 minutes later, Caleb stepped out into the alley behind the diner. The air smelled like fryer grease, exhaust, and old rain. His hands trembled as he reached into his jacket out of instinct for a cigarette he hadn't smoked in over a decade. He didn't light it, just held it like an old habit reaching out from another life. The sunlight outside was almost blinding after the dim kitchen lights. Through the smudged side window, he spotted her again. Jenna, moving from table to table, her face a mask of calm, carrying a pot of coffee like it was armor. She had emerged from that break room with no announcement, no apology, no appeal for understanding. She simply returned, like always, because when survival was the only option, grief had no place to rest. Figured I'd find you out here. Big Eddie's voice drifted from the back door. He leaned against the brick wall beside Caleb, his bulk casting a long shadow in the narrow alley. The usual humor in his eyes had been replaced by something heavier. You're taking this hard, he said gently. Most folks, they hear a story like that, feel bad for 5 minutes and go on with their lives. But you look like a man who just watched a ghost crawl out of your own chest. Tell me about her, Caleb murmured. Tell me about Lily. Eddie was quiet for a while. He watched a stray cat dig through a nearby trash bin, its ribs showing beneath its fur, surviving on scraps. Sweet kid, he said finally. Used to come in after school. Sat in the corner booth coloring while Jenna finished her shift. Loved pancakes, always asked for extra whipped cream, big brown eyes, just like her mama. Caleb kept watching through the window as Jenna poured coffee for a table of elderly regulars. Her movements were robotic, yet deliberate, precise, like she'd trained herself not to crack. How long she worked here, Caleb asked. 3, 4 years, I think. Started when Lily was still in diapers. The kid's dad left early on, couldn't handle it. She doesn't talk about him, but it broke something in her when he walked. The puzzle was assembling itself now, one agonizing piece at a time. Jenna had been doing it all alone. 2 jobs, sometimes 3, cleaning offices late into the night, until Lily got too sick to be left with the neighbor's teen anymore, until everything collapsed. She's got no one, Eddie added, except us, and maybe not even that much longer. Caleb exhaled shakily, the truth pressing down like a mountain on his chest. And for the first time, since going undercover, he wasn't sure who the broken one really was. Jenna, or the man who had come here looking to fire her. She worked herself to the bone, Eddie murmured, his gaze still fixed on the figure moving inside the diner. Through the fogged window, Caleb watched Jenna place a slice of pie in front of an elderly man. He said something, maybe a joke, maybe just a kind word, and for the briefest moment, Jenna's face softened. There it was, a flicker of the young woman she used to be. Not a grieving mother, not a tired waitress buried under tragedy, but just a girl with a smile. And then it vanished, like a dream dissolving in daylight. The medical bills? Caleb asked, though every part of him recoiled from the answer. They started piling up last winter, Eddie replied. Lily's leukemia. It wasn't the regular kind. The chemo barely worked. So Jenna took her to Children's in the city, then to Chicago. Even drove her down to Houston to see a specialist who was doing trials with some kind of experimental gene therapy. He paused, pulled out a cigarette, and lit it with the steady hands of someone who'd long since made peace with his bad habits. She sold everything, Eddie said. Her car, her grandmother's jewelry. Even that little TV Lily loved, used to watch cartoons before bed. He took a drag, exhaled slowly. Started walking to work. Rain, snow, didn't matter. The image slammed into Caleb like a freight train. Jenna, soaked to the bone, walking miles in the dark with numb fingers and red eyes, only to step behind the counter and paste on a tired smile. All while he'd been sitting in an executive suite, sipping designer coffee and slashing budgets. I tried to help, Eddie said. Gave her cash when I could. Made sure she got the best tips. Tony and Sarah did the same, but none of us got much to give. The health insurance, Caleb began, but his voice cracked. That's a corporate thing, Eddie said, not bitter, just tired. Tony's been begging for it since he took over. Every year it's the same. Corporate says the location's not profitable enough, says numbers don't lie. Caleb swallowed hard. He'd been in those meetings, sat at those tables, used those exact words. Business is business, they'd said, as if that excused anything. She never complained, Eddie continued, crushing the cigarette under his boot. Not when Lily spent 2 weeks in the hospital, not when all she had to eat was vending machine coffee and scraps we smuggled from the kitchen. She just kept showing up, like the job was the only thing keeping her from falling apart. Through the glass, Caleb saw her again. Jenna was wiping down a spotless table, over and over, slow and mechanical. It wasn't about the crumbs. It was about control. In a world that had spiraled beyond reason, the rhythm of cleaning offered something solid. The funeral? Caleb asked, his throat raw. Monday morning, Eddie replied. Closed casket. Maybe 30 people came. Lily would have been 7 next month. Jenna spoke, told everyone how brave her daughter was, how she never stopped coloring, said Lily kept asking when she could come back to the diner to see everyone. Caleb closed his eyes, but the image wouldn't leave. A mother, barely older than some of his interns, standing beside a coffin the size of a toy box, saying goodbye to her child. She came to work the next day, Eddie added. Because she had to, Caleb whispered. Because if she stopped, Eddie said, she'd lose the only thing she had left. That night, Caleb didn't sleep. He sat in his hotel room, still wearing clothes that reeked of grease and heartbreak, staring at spreadsheets that now felt more like confessionals. Every policy, every denial of benefits, every cent squeezed from operations for the sake of margins. They weren't numbers anymore. They were decisions that had slowly crushed people like Jenna. At 3 a.m., he called his assistant. Clear my schedule Thursday. At 4 a.m., he called his lawyer. Draft the new employee benefit policy, full coverage, sick leave, bereavement. No exceptions. At 5 a.m., he took the longest shower of his life, washing off not just dish soap and fryer grease, but weeks of pretense and years of misguided priorities. By 7:30 a.m., Caleb Hartman was no longer hiding. He stepped through the doors of Maple and Main dressed in a tailored charcoal gray suit. Crisp, polished, powerful. A stark contrast to the dishwasher everyone had known. Big Eddie spotted him first. The spatula slipped from his hand and clanged against the grill. Holy hell, he muttered. Sarah turned, eyes widening. Oh my God, oh my actual God. Caleb didn't say a word. He didn't need to. His presence filled the room. The quiet buzz of early morning regulars halted. Coffee cups stopped mid-air. Newspapers lowered. Tony came out of the office, face contorting through a series of emotions, confusion, recognition, and finally, dread. Everyone, Caleb said, his voice cutting through the silence like a judge's verdict. I need all staff in the dining room, now. Jenna emerged from behind the counter, coffee pot in hand. She moved slowly, still processing the world through a veil of grief. She looked at him. No recognition in her eyes. just the wary detachment of someone who expected disappointment. He turned to Tony. "Close the front door, flip the sign." Tony obeyed, hands trembling. 5 minutes later, the entire day shift had assembled. Sarah, Big Eddie, Tony, Jenna. 2 part-time cooks peered from behind the kitchen doors like animals sensing a storm. They stood together, bonded not by fear, but by loyalty, united against whatever came next. Caleb faced them. For the first time in 3 weeks, he wasn't hiding behind a mop or a fake name. And for the first time in 20 years, he wasn't speaking from a script written in spreadsheets. "My name is Caleb Hartman," he said. "I own this restaurant, and 36 more just like it." The room went still, not with fear, but revelation. Sarah's hands flew to her mouth. Big Eddie mumbled something between a prayer and a curse. Tony's skin turned ghost white. Jenna just stared, her face unreadable, as if this too was just another twist in a life already warped by loss. Caleb took a breath and let the weight of his truth land. "For the past 3 weeks, I've been working here undercover to observe operations and employee performance. And now, it was time to do what he should have done from the beginning. Not just see, but feel." Caleb's voice held steady, but his gaze drifted, too heavy to meet the eyes of those he had come to judge. "I came here to evaluate this diner's profitability," he began, each word carved from the weight of hindsight. "To identify weak points, streamline costs, make decisions." Eddie took a step forward, jaw clenched. "You son of a..." Caleb lifted a hand gently, not to defend, but to confess. "I came here to find flaws in all of you," he said, his voice softening. "But instead, I found flaws in myself." He turned slowly, deliberately, to face Jenna. And for the first time since stepping into the diner in his tailored suit, his composure cracked. Just slightly, but enough for everyone to see he wasn't here to perform. He was here to atone. "Jenna, I owe you an apology that no words can truly hold," he said, voice unsteady. "On Tuesday, I spoke to you without understanding. I saw only your mistakes, not the mountains you were quietly climbing. I judged your performance without knowing you were carrying the kind of grief that can break a person." Jenna didn't move. Her expression was unreadable, but something flickered in her eyes. A faint glimmer of acknowledgement, or maybe just the will to listen. "I built this company on the belief that hard work should be rewarded, that our employees are our family. Somewhere along the way, I lost sight of that. I lost sight of you." Caleb reached into his jacket and pulled out a folder. "Legal documents, contracts, policy changes. These are effective immediately across every location we operate," he said, his tone now strong and deliberate. 2 weeks paid bereavement leave for immediate family. 1 week for extended. PTO begins accruing on day 1. Health insurance for every employee working over 20 hours a week. Full mental health coverage, including grief counseling." Sarah let out a sound between a sob and a laugh, clinging to Big Eddie's arm as tears spilled freely. Tony looked like he might pass out. Caleb's voice softened as he looked back at Jenna. "And for you," he said, "a fully paid leave of absence for as long as you need. Your job will be here when you're ready. No questions, no pressure." Jenna blinked. Once, twice. Then she took a step back, as though the words had physically hit her. For the first time since he revealed himself, her armor cracked. "There's more," Caleb said gently. "We have a management training program. If you're interested, I'd like to see you run one of these diners someday." Her voice trembled as it escaped her lips. "Why?" Caleb's throat tightened. "Because I watched you show up. Every day, carrying grief I can't begin to comprehend. Because you returned to work the day after your daughter's funeral. Because you kept moving forward when most people wouldn't have made it out of bed. Because that says more about your strength than any quarterly report or performance review ever could." He scanned the room, at people he'd once reduced to numbers, faces now illuminated with dignity, resilience, and loyalty he had overlooked. And because any company that can't stand beside its people during the worst moments of their lives isn't a company worth owning. 3 weeks later, the diner buzzed with its usual energy, but something had shifted. The atmosphere was lighter, more human. Laughter returned. Conversations lingered longer. Sarah no longer raced through tables. Big Eddie joked louder from the kitchen. The burden of silent suffering had lifted, just a little. Caleb sat in his favorite booth, the one where Cal the dishwasher used to sneak glances through the service window. Now he wore a simple shirt and khakis, professional but humble. The coffee had improved. Eddie had upgraded the machine with the equipment budget Caleb had approved. The bell over the door chimed. Jenna stepped inside. She wasn't transformed. Grief doesn't allow for magic tricks. But she was steadier. Her hair was tied back in a neat bun. Her uniform was crisp. Her hands no longer trembled. The shadow of loss was still in her eyes, but the desperate hollowness was gone. "Jenna," Sarah gasped, rushing over to wrap her in a gentle hug. "You look so good, honey." "I feel better," Jenna replied. "Not whole, but better." Eddie appeared from the kitchen, grinning for the first time in weeks. "There's my girl. You here to work or just stopping by?" Jenna looked around the diner, and for the first time, there was warmth behind her eyes. "I think I'm ready, if you'll have me." Tony emerged with a grin. "We've had 3 temps try to fill your shoes. One of them served a burger with the wrapper still on it." A small laugh slipped from Jenna's lips. Software fragile, but real. It lit her face in a way Caleb had never seen before. She spotted him sitting in the booth and walked over, still careful in her steps, but with purpose now instead of fear. "Mr. Hartman," she said, extending a hand. "Thank you for everything." "Caleb," he replied gently, standing to take her hand. "And you don't owe me thanks. If anything, I should be thanking you." "For what?" "For reminding me why I started this business in the first place." Jenna tilted her head, studying him with the kind of clarity that only those who've been through hell can carry. "You really didn't know?" she asked. "About Lily?" "No," Caleb admitted. "And that's my failure. I built a company where people were scared to ask for help, where silence was easier than vulnerability. You shouldn't have had to carry all that alone." Jenna looked toward the red booth in the corner by the window. "Can I do something before I start?" "Of course." She walked to the corner and pulled a small silver frame from her purse. Inside was a photo of Lily. Cartoon crumbs on her cheek, whipped cream on her nose, eyes sparkling with joy. "She used to sit here every afternoon," Jenna whispered. "Coloring, watching people pass by. Said she wanted to work here one day, just like Mama." Caleb swallowed hard. "She can stay," he said, voice catching. "As long as you want." "She'd like that," Jenna whispered. Tears welled in her eyes, but they weren't the kind that came from despair. These tears held love, memory, peace. Lunch service began. The diner came alive with its familiar symphony, sizzling grills, clinking dishes, and the low hum of conversation. And in the corner booth by the window, Lily's photograph caught the light just right, her smile casting a glow that seemed to warm the whole room. Customers glanced at the frame and smiled, without knowing why. Jenna tied on her apron and picked up her order pad, her hands steady, her heart a little lighter. "I didn't expect kindness," she said quietly as she passed Caleb. "Not after everything." "You taught me what it really means to show up," he replied. She nodded, then walked away to take her first order in 3 weeks. Caleb leaned back in his booth, watching life unfold. Imperfect, chaotic, beautiful. Outside, school kids walked by, laughing. Through the glass, their joy drifted in like sunlight. And in the corner, Lily watched it all. Still part of this place. Still home. Where love lingered, where memory lived, where hope, quiet and constant, never truly left.